Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Okay, wait, let's start in 1 minute. So did you get a chance to have a look at the document I posted? IGNO material is good for some of the theories here. They nicely laid out various areas that we require for evolution. By any chance, did you see that material that I posted?
Just kind of briefly.
No? Yes, no?
Yes, sir. I went through the whole reading.
Nikhil.
No, sir.
No? Okay, that's all right. Yes, so I'm going to show you those articles, those documents. They are the ones that we are going to use for these classes initially. And then there are a few things that are missing from them, so which I'm going to provide you separately. But for today's class, those series that we are going to focus on. So before that, I think the 2 questions I've given you, right? Did you started working on those questions? Do you have any doubts about them? So what is your plan about them? Are you working on them? So when do you want to submit them?
Yes, sir. So, but can you please explain how to write the introduction portion in this?
Introduction portion to that. To which question?
Critically discuss Mendelian principles and their application in human population.
Okay, right. So what about you, Sunil? Did you started writing them?
Sir, no, but next time I will submit next class.
Okay, no worries. So when the ideas are fresh in your mind or current, because this is just the beginning for us, right? So I just want to see how are you writing those. So based on that, doesn't matter. However you begin it, because I want to see the raw file of it. Okay, before me giving you ideas on that. So based on your writing style, I would like to suggest you something. But wherever you're stuck, like what we just mentioned, we want to have an introduction for discussing about Mendelian characteristics in humans. First of all, talk about here, this is historical aspect. So what you have to write here is who is Mendel and how did he begin his work and what aspects of inheritance he talked about. Like the way we discussed in the class, what are characteristics. So basically coming from that and also picking up the plant and specific types of plant components that you had picked up briefly. Historically, you have to write about what Mendel did. Okay. Then your focus has to be mostly on his, observation or how his observations are connected to human examples. Okay. So first part, you write about who is Mendel, what he did. Briefly, like in a paragraph, you talk about what he did and what is the importance of what he has done. So talking about, he's so-and-so person who actually worked on the pea plant, deriving the principles governing how characteristics move from generation to generation, or simply inheritance of characteristics. By selecting 7 different characteristics of pea plant. By controlled crosses or controlled, experiments on them, making experiments on them, you say. So this has to be the intro part. Then you start with the examples in humans. two approaches. One approach is where you start with the examples in humans, connecting them to law of dominance and explain law of dominance, but with human examples. Instead of tall plants, dwarf plants, pick up an attached earlobe, free earlobe, or one of the examples that we talked about, PTC testing. Explain the law of dominance from that and explain the law of segregation from it. Then you may discuss the third component, very much like how it is given in the Steinen row. PTC testing, attached earlobe, this component you take it, and how independent assortment work. So taking these examples, explain the three laws. Those three laws in the context of human examples, and mention other features like we talked about in the class, like widow's peak, dimples, and they also follow Mendelian inheritance pattern. Towards the end, if you want, also mention about genetic diseases like hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, we talked in the last class, as also examples. This has to be the flow. This has to be the structure. Play around. Answers can be written differently. Okay, but this is a general idea to begin. Right? I want you to see your writing style, how you are putting together the ideas. But don't worry, I'm not expecting expert answers here yet. Okay, because you're in the process of learning. Simultaneously, we are figuring out how well you can write. So I can provide you guidelines based on the way you are writing the answers. Okay, so these are the initial sessions. Don't try to be really perfect. Try your best and let me see where you stand and what type of help you need. Okay, that is the idea. But do it. If you're not able to write two questions, at least write one question. Let me get a sample from you. That's important. Okay, we'll see whether I'll provide a way of submitting it in the classroom group or in the Telegram group also. You can post me. We'll see. I'll give suggestions on that. What is best to do. Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
So I think I was asking the same questions, like posting it on the Telegram group or on the website.
Right. So let's see. I think for you, I think let's figure out, because I'm also new to this program. I will do one thing. I'll create a paper with these questions. So what you do, you submit the answer as a file to it, because I see that when I submit it back, you can see the corrections, and I'll see if other students can also learn from it where possible. Okay, for now, let's follow that. If that is not working, if I didn't set it up, if your answer is ready, just post it in the Telegram to me personally. Don't post it in the group, but you click my name and submit to me in the Telegram. Okay. We'll slowly figure out, and then eventually we'll see what is the best way, because first two questions we'll see, it doesn't matter. And then let me see what is the best way to do it, because for me also it's an experience to learn the program. Okay, right. But begin there. Okay, before we get into the concept of the new chapter, if you do that, when the ideas are filled, it'll be easier for you. Then I'll give you one or two questions from this evolution as well. Okay, right. Let me open my files. So two sources we are going to use here for this class. One is IGNO material is good to begin with, and also I made a few slides on them. So we're going to both use of them. And let's understand the concept of evolution. So as I was telling you briefly, the reason why I picked up going with evolution to begin with, because we figured out one, DNA basics. So we learned the terminology, genes, alleles, chromosomes, cell division. So we have a basic understanding about how things work inside the body. And then I went to the inheritance principles. So learning how inheritance happens, learning those laws, and we talked about lethal genes, sublethal genes. But keeping in mind, we are figuring out the base here. So basics that we covered related to terminology of DNA and rest of the things like cell division, Mendelian genetics, so inheritance principles we figured out. And the next piece that we require, because we frequently talk about this, is evolution. In unit 1.4, we are going to deal here the first part mainly, human evolution and emergence of man. Biological and cultural factors of human evolution we are going to cover later. I'm not going to focus on the specific factors now, but when we talk about 1.5 primates, there we are going to focus on the biological and cultural factors. But B, 1.4b, if you notice in the syllabus, theories of organic evolution, pre-Darwinian evolution, Darwinian evolution, post-Darwinian evolution we are going to focus on. Okay, and then in continuation in 1.4c, synthetic theory of evolution. Here we are going to go through certain laws, certain terms related to evolution. So these are the ones that form the basis. Once we understand the basis, now going ahead with the cultural factors, evolution factors makes sense. But even before that, B and C need to be figured out. Okay, so what we are learning here is 1.4b, 1.4c. Then I'll come back to these topic. There I'm going to talk to you about cultural factors, primates, fossils. We are going to cover mostly towards the end of all the classes. We are going to cover those parts once we get a little bit more equipped with the other information. So 1.4 B and C we are going to cover in the next coming classes starting from today. So is the logic clear to you? You will understand it. You might appreciate it once we finish talking about evolutionary theories, because this is what forms a foundation to our understanding. Okay, so let me share the screen. So I'm going to share this document as well with you, IGNOS material. There are a couple of ways that we can learn this. So there are a couple of versions of IGNOS material also. This is the one I posted, Theories of Organic Evolution I posted. But before that, there is one more document that makes it a little bit easy for us to follow what this talks about. So this is a big document, Principles of Evolution. This is taken from IGNOS material. So every information that we require is put together really well. So we utilize this as a source of information, as a reference point for us. Okay, so here we are going to first of all focus on what is evolution, understand what is the concept of evolution. And today we'll start with pre-Darwinian evolution. If time permits, we'll also talk about Darwinian evolution today. So what is evolution for you? Briefly, if you can tell me, what do you think about evolution? So I know where to start, how much to explain. Briefly, no stress on you. Just mention that, what does it mean by evolution to you? What is your understanding today about evolution? Okay, Sunil, you want to go ahead?
Sir, recently there was a news actually. So scientists have found a nerve near our nose, a kind of sac. So it was written that it earlier it wasn't found, but now they are able to found this. So they named it as a new organ, kind of thing. So I as far as I can infer, it is something which wasn't there, but now it has come with time.
Something that appeared over a time, something that started forming over a time. So there is definitely a time component to it. Okay, and I think if you're saying something that is not there, now it is seen, maybe change. We are seeing a change in that process, right? Okay, good. Right. Next. Any one of you. Vishal, are you online as well?
Yes, sir. I think to me, evolution is moving to a state of higher, I would say, moving from a state of low satisfaction to higher satisfaction in those terms, as in something better than previous.
So, okay, gradual change, gradual improvement, you mean to say?
Yeah, yeah.
We go towards gradually it gets better, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Let's see if that is the case. Okay, right. Shweta, Nikhil, one of you.
So for me, evolution means like emergence of something new from a very small thing. Like for
Small means
example, a
small in
cell.
terms of size, or small in terms of complexity, or less complex. You mean?
For example, cell.
Okay.
Hmm.
Cell two. What is something new from cell?
Like from cell, a zygote is formed.
Uh, okay. So, but you are seeing in the context of life of a single person,
Hmm.
starting from zygote to, okay, right, all right,
For
yeah,
me, the evolution will be changes in the characteristics of features of organism, um,
hmm.
like as it goes in different generations, like
Yeah.
as generations change.
Great. Thank you. Right. I think more or less what you're talking about is this is happening over a period of time. I think you all have that idea. And for some of you, I think a change, something that was not there, but something that happened, exist now, becoming to exist, is a change. Okay, is an evolution, or something that from inferior to better. So as we progress towards in certain direction, is what sometimes is considered to be evolution. Okay, and but evolution is a big picture. Yes, changes can happen within us. In sometimes we refer to it as microevolution, but evolution is something that has been going on maybe forever, since the starting of life to what we are seeing today, and it is happening even today. It may happen even in the future. That is the inherent way of every organism, that it undergoes change. But what changes it, and why are they changing? Are they really going from inferior to superior? Are they becoming less complex to more complex? So sometimes it is difficult to capture this picture and explain it. This is exactly what we are going to learn today, how people thought about it today after having this technology, after having this understanding. Okay, this is the opinion that we have. But what people thought about it when there was nothing, no idea about what is what, biological system, DNA, genes, nothing was known at that time. So, and they were strongly influenced by, depending on what era we are talking about, they're either strongly influenced by, existence of God or the concept of God, or strongly influenced by what people think if they say something against the God. So these ideas have made it a bit complex and influenced their thoughts. But for sure, evolution has a time component in that. Let's first begin with few definitions. So these are the definitions that you have to write depending on the question, like who said what. But Herbert Spencer, I'm going to share this document with you after the class. Herbert Spencer, he's an English philosopher. He was the one who gets credit for using the term evolution for the first time. So he used the term, evolution for the first time. Okay. So here for him, evolution, nothing but change. Evolution means change, being changing from one form to another form, whether it is getting better or not, but changing from one to another. So it is the concept that has a large impact on the concept of evolution that we are seeing today. And time, change are the two keywords. Over time, things change. That can be considered as evolution. Organisms, existing species, maybe plants, animals, microorganisms, doesn't matter. They're constantly changing. In what time scale? Maybe time scale bigger than our existence. Maybe we are talking about several, thousands of years to millions of years and so on. So it's an ongoing process. But I don't think we have a directionality to that. I know it looks like humans are most superior than any other organisms, but there is no guarantee that always evolution goes towards something better. It is not necessary. Okay, but that's how it sounds, but it is not necessarily the case. I think I would like to quickly read this quotation I wanted to tell you, which I really liked about the concept of evolution. Okay. I don't recollect. Where did I put that? Okay. Let me tell you that. I think Dobzhansky said that nothing makes sense in biology unless you consider the concept of evolution. Okay, everything in the light of evolution makes sense. Otherwise, they're all bits and pieces, fragments. When you connect the idea of evolution, that is something gradually changing, then you start seeing the connections between all these organisms. Otherwise, why do we have so much of diversity, right? And what is the connection? Why are they there? Did someone actually created them like that as it is? These questions pop up. But in biology, once you start understanding the idea of evolution, they're all starting to make sense to you. Okay, this was the idea about that statement that I wanted to mention, but I forgot really where I put that. Okay, right. So Herbert Spencer is the one English philosopher who first time used the term evolution. And two types of evolutions I was briefly telling you. One, sometimes we call it as microevolution. Another one is macro. Micro means tiny, small changes is micro, right? So changes that happen within us. Shweta, as you mentioned, anything that you are talking about moving ahead in the progress, in a way we cannot call it evolution, but if I have to connect remotely to that concept, you may see that in the process of us growing, we may acquire changes in the body. Acquire changes different from our parents as well. So every generation we have diversity. Every generation we are different from the previously existing, generations. So this is an ongoing process, but if it is happening at an individual level, you call it microevolution. As you see in this, microevolution, so changes that are happening within the organisms over a period of time. Changes which are happening over a period of time within an organism is termed microevolution. So changes happening at individual level are referred to micro. In other words, these are small steps. They don't give rise to a completely new organism, like new species is not created from that, but baby steps. Okay, so that is called microevolution. Be familiar about this term. So this document lists out many of those things and just crisply written together. So that is why I thought this is better. Otherwise, Ember and Ember, even our Stein and Rowe talks about it, but here is a bit more complex. Instead, I want you to be a little bit more tuned to the exam here. So this is the best source for that, right? You got what is microevolution? It is the changes that are happening at an organism level of an individual. Next, macro. Macro means big changes. When do these big changes happen? Always changes happen in small steps, but they look big. They appear big. They appear to have created big changes, big difference. This happens when you actually see time scale. It's like zooming in and zooming out. If you zoom in, baby steps can be seen. But if you zoom out, many people simultaneously are changing. Actually, whole species is changing, maybe giving rise to new species. Like the way monkeys and the apes, for example, they eventually gave rise to humans. If you zoom out to the picture, you can see the big picture of it. You can see macro changes in them. So this happens, this takes enough time. So where macroevolution is, it changes from one being to the other. From one being to the other, meaning one species giving rise to another species. Like monkeys giving rise to apes, let's say, apes giving rise to humans. These are all different species. We'll talk about this when we discuss about the human's place in primate world, for example. I'll give you the concept of classification there. But for now, remember, species are the group of organisms which look similar, share a lot of features. Okay, like humans is a species. Okay, so like that, we have these species, one species giving rise to another species, which requires a lot of steps, a lot of changes. Such bigger concept of evolution is referred to as macroevolution. Macro. So micro, macro evolution. Differences you have to understand here. Micro is happening at the level of individual. Macro evolution happening at the bigger scale. So small scale changes, big scale changes. And we require big scale changes for monkeys and chimpanzees to eventually look like humans, right? Small changes here and there are not enough. And those small changes may not happen in one individual. They have to keep get accumulated. Then eventually, maybe in the time span of 1 million years, for example, you find one species becoming another species, meaning it doesn't immediately become something else, but changes happening in this group of organisms, few of them will acquire changes and eventually they become a new species. They look like they are becoming. So this is not talking about same individual becoming A, becoming B. I'm talking about A, B, C, D, keep changing. Eventually the product you get is Z, let's say. Z is different than A. That is what I'm talking about. Okay, this is not happening at the individual. Whenever we say that humans came from chimpanzees or chimpanzees became humans, the same species or organism doesn't become. It keeps acquiring changes over a period of time. They become too different to be called as the previous species. Now you start naming it as a different species. Okay, so this takes millions of years. Maybe microorganisms which quickly generate, for them, generation may happen, evolution may happen in the time scale that we can watch, we can see, but humans, given our long lifespans and in the short, long generation times, it will take several, at least thousands of years to millions of years. Okay, right. Those changes are referred to as macroevolution when new species have come up from the existing species. Okay, this is a basic difference between micro and macroevolution. Next, sometimes we also hear the term organic evolution. Organic evolution. Organic evolution. So what is organic? Organic refers to living systems. Anything organic, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, right? Hydrocarbons, we talk about this in organic chemistry. Hydrocarbons, carbon, hydrogen, and mostly these two, plus oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus. These type of components are rarely present in them, but they do. So these type of things are called organic material. So organic means because our body is made up of those mainly carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, so we refer to them as organic bodies. So organic evolution means changes that have taken place in living things like plants, animals, etc. Okay, so this is why sometimes we refer it to as organic evolution, formation of living systems and changes in them is what is called organic evolution. Okay, right. Few terms I want to introduce here before getting into the theories. Okay, microevolution, who termed it, and microevolution, macroevolution. So next, maybe a few definitions that you want to make a note of. We'll get into the details. Just now, write a couple of statements related to that. We eventually get into the details. So, like for example, as defined by Dodson and Dodson in 1976, two scientists called Dodson and Dodsons. So in their view, evolution means it is the process by which related populations diverge from one another. So it is a process by which related populations diverge from one another. Two similar populations, but they change in a different way. So they become something else eventually. So if we have A and B are the two populations which are similar, A may become eventually D and B will become eventually F. So this can be called as evolution. Okay, in the initial times, 1970s like that, they talked about this. Okay, and Charles Darwin, even before that in 1859, called this as descent with modification. I'll explain this. You need a bit of explanation related to that. For now, just write down the statement as it is. Descent with modification. Charles Darwin in 1859 defined evolution as descent with modification. Descent with modification. Modification means change. Descent means the newly arised organisms, new generations with change, is how he called as evolution.
So what was period of Herbert Spencer?
What was the period of Herbert Spencer? He is also the 19th century man. Let me see if I have put into my handout. No, I have not made a note of exact time period. I will tell you that. He is from almost the same time as these people in the 19th century.
So I was asking only because it was written that he first used the term evolution. So he must be like before Darwin, right?
Must be before Darwin, but around the same time as he is. So Herbert Spencer. (1820 to 1903). So around the same time as these people, Darwin and bigger Mendel, around the same time. Okay, but he came up with the idea because ideas and theories are different and using the terms are different. Okay. (1820 to 1903). So 19th century. Okay. Right. So there are a few more definitions that you notice here. The material. One is, look at how differently they have talked about the same concept. Dobzhansky, he's also a geneticist. He worked on Drosophila, those type of components to understand more about the molecular mechanism behind evolution. So he said evolution is the development of dissimilarities between the ancestral and the descendant population. Same concept worded differently here. Evolution is the development of dissimilarities, mean change. Dissimilarities mean change, right? Development of dissimilarities between ancestral and the descendant population. From the previous existing population to the new populations, dissimilarities have increased, changes have increased. This is how we define evolution. I just want you to have an idea about what are the different ways we can explain the concept of evolution here. But they all mean the same. They are all referring to the same thing, whether you say descent with modification as mentioned by Charles Darwin, or evolution is a process related to populations diverging from one another, change, but they have taken a specific route here. And Dobzhansky said it is adding changes, adding differences, adding changes from one existing organism or species to the new one. So dissimilarities between ancestral ones and the descendant population. Okay, if I have to put more, evolved version of the definition of evolution, this is what it is. But in anthropology, we have to cite and give the names of what people have thought about or what they have said. That is why I gave you a little bit of historical definitions related to this. Now I would like to give you a little bit more comprehensive definition to evolution. So evolution is a continuous, gradual, and orderly process is continuous, gradual, and an orderly process that always remains in action, meaning that is always happening. As we are speaking about it, it is happening. It is always happening or always in action. And is responsible for fixing the genetic changes in the hereditary material of population. So this idea came afterwards. Once we figured out that what is governing these characteristics like DNA. So now we know that it is a continuous process and gradually happening, nobody controlling it, and orderly happening. It is happening in a direction. It looks like it is happening in a direction. And it is responsible for fixing the genetic changes in the hereditary, meaning what is it acting on? It is acting on our instructions that are present in our DNA. Instructions present in our hereditary material. Fixing the genetic changes in the hereditary material of a population. Okay, this is more comprehensive idea about evolution.
So this sounds like this definition sounds different to the other definitions we were talking about.
Correct. This is evolved. This is like the one we created after knowing all those examples. It is today's version. Because initially they didn't know, Charles Darwin didn't know what are genes. So he didn't know how to define this. They were only seeing connections. They were seeing through their observations, they're able to see few changes that people before them have thought not to be true. So they were only talking about speaking from their mind, speaking about these ideas with few observations added to them. But this is all what we see today. This is our understanding or summary of evolution. So this is more evolved evolution definition. In a way. I was reading, I think it was in Ember and Ember, he said evolution of evolution. The title was evolution of evolution, how evolution concept evolved. Okay, for that, next we are going to talk about pre-Darwinian theory. So here, I just gave few terms and few definitions related to evolution here. Now let's dig into the pre-Darwinian theories. So before Darwin, Darwin is a reference point in evolution. Okay, he was the one who kind of nailed the key theory, although his theory is also flawed. But today, most of our ideas are depending on him. So Darwin is a reference point. So here in the syllabus, they said before Darwin, after Darwin. What was the belief about evolution?
Sir, can I ask one question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, like this definition talks only about the genetic changes. Sir, but when we study about other definitions, it's more about environment, like surrounding changes. So have we come to the point that it is only about the genetic changes?
Very good. Now, let me ask you a question. So evolution is acting on what?
So changes, like changes surrounding us?
Right. Acting on what? What are they acting on? Temperature, whatever you're talking about in the environment. What is it acting on? What is it changing?
It is changing of course, the genes, like somehow the DNA.
Exactly. So here we're talking about those things that are responsible for fixing the DNA, fixing changes. That involves environment, that involves many other components. But at the end of the day, changes have to happen in DNA. Only then you start seeing changes happening in that species. So ultimately, they all have to affect the DNA. Correct? That is what we are realizing. Initially, they didn't know that something like DNA exists. So today we are saying ultimately anything, environment, whatever natural selection we talk about, we are going to talk about acquired characteristics, for example, inheritance of acquired characteristics. Whatever the theory is, end of the day, it has to act on this DNA component, the genetic component. Only when changes happen in the genetic component, this can be seen as an outcome. Okay, that is why here the key idea is evolved idea from those. So we're not denying the factor that evolution is not, environment is not playing a role. We are seeing that environment is acting on the DNA. That is when this happens. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay, now let's see the theories, various theories that happened before Darwin. So as per the syllabus, pre-Darwinian theories of evolution that we are going to talk about. There are so many ideas. I'm going to talk about few selected ideas here. We don't have to know all of them, but few major theories that happened before Darwin. Okay, so pre-Darwinian theories they are known as before Darwin. What are those theories? Okay, and most of these theories are actually built on speculations and observations. So pre-Darwin theories are mainly made based on speculations, theories, ideas, and added with them observations, some observations that they make, but they started interpreting them differently. How differently we will see it. So these are the result of pre-Darwinian theories are mainly the result of speculations and observations. Of what type of things? Living ones compared to the non-living ones. In the atmosphere, in the nature, if you see living ones, how they are different from fixed ones. Non-living ones, which more or less tend to stay the same, except for some chemical changes that happen in them. But the rest of the things change. Living things seem to be different. They seem to be flexible. They seem to be changing. So when they compared non-living with living, there was definitely a striking difference between them. And they were trying to explain what could be the reason, why are they different? They all have come up with different ideas later. Okay, that is what we are going to see in pre-Darwinian theories. Okay, although at that time they didn't have enough knowledge to tell, but majority of them have given us some idea. It's evolved over a period of time, step by step manner. Suddenly someone didn't wake up in the sleep and said, this is evolution. No, it took centuries, at least centuries as far as understanding goes, to come up with the actual idea of what evolution is. Maybe in future this may change, but to our understanding, I think we figured out what is evolution. That is what we think. And same thing that might be with them as well. They might have thought that they figured out what is evolution. We have to wait and see what happens in future generations. Okay, so they're basically old theories of evolution. Let's begin with the Greek thinkers and evolution. So Greek thinkers on evolution like Aristotle. Aristotle, who is considered as father of anthropology. Aristotle from the period of 384 to 322 BC. Okay, so let's look at what Aristotle thought about it. Greek philosopher, in their writings, it was clear that they had some idea because they were curious. They want to explain why things are different. Why do we have birds? Why do we have plants? Why do we have animals? They wanted to explain it. They were curious about it. So Aristotle believed that old forms of life giving rise to new forms. He said there is a connection. Old ones are giving rise to the new ones. So there is change happening. He was recognizing that change was happening in them. And he felt that organisms have certain inert instinct. They have something happening in inner conscious that they have, or an instinct that is present in them, okay, which enables them to transform towards better. So they were changing, they were adapting, they were becoming better. So this is the idea that Aristotle had, which is, I think, to a certain extent holds true even today, right? And interestingly, the olden idea that we are seeing here was more logical than the ideas that we see next. So what did Aristotle believe? He believed that new forms are the result of old forms through change. So they adapted, they're adapting to something better. That is how I think he was seeing, he could see the connection that it was changing. It was evolving. And he saw them not only in humans, animals, plants, he could see the difference in all of those living systems around them. Plants, animals, and even in humans. Okay. I'll just mention that just for you to know that there are many other people who thought about it slightly differently from what Aristotle did. But in the exam, you may not have enough space to write all these things, but I wanted to have that idea. Mostly we're going to talk about Greek philosophers, and Carolus Linnaeus we're going to discuss briefly, and grandfather of Charles Darwin, what he thought about it, and Lamarckism, Darwinism. Most important ones are Lamarckism and Darwinism. Okay, but before that, we have to be aware about theories and how gradually this concept has evolved. So you write the structure for this, Pre-Darwinian Theories, persons' names, their ideas. Write them. The actual evolutionary, another article of IGNO I have given to you that talks about theories individually, but I felt this is a better flow. It has a better flow of information to understand it. But you combine that. You can take, because briefly 3-4 lines I mentioned about theories. Just be aware in case if they ask you to write about Pre-Darwinian theories, so you discuss about them. Okay, right. So we just talked about what Aristotle thought about it, but there are also two other people like Herodotus and as well as Empedocles. Okay, these people were around the same time, 484 to 425 BC, after Aristotle, and Empedocles from 504 to 433 BC. Okay, so they also talked about the concept of adaptation, meaning changing for betterment, changing for better, changing into something better, otherwise adapting to something better. So he thought plants probably evolved before animals. They were seeing animals are more complex than the plants. So they were seeing that difference. So interestingly, these ideas were already existing in Aristotle's time and these people's time, which actually changed later. You can see what influenced them to think differently and less logically. Okay, so these people taught, because they worked on the concept of biological concept of evolution, mainly adaptation. Okay, so plants evolving before animals, indicating gradual evolution of higher organisms. So plants came first, then animals, then humans, they thought. So they were seeing the complexity of life and the differences in their complexity. So they thought plants might have come first, then animals, then humans. And for them, microorganisms were not existing. They didn't know that microorganisms are there, they survived. Because there was no way to see it. Only in 1665 onwards, when microscopes were figured out, we started recognizing microorganisms. So what they could see were plants, animals, and humans. Makes sense, right? At that time, that is how much they can know. That is what they see. So they try to explain it. Okay. So this is about the Greek thinkers and the evolution concept at that time. Next, we'll come to medieval theories.
Sir, sir, are humans more complex than animals?
What is it?
Uh, do humans are more complex than the animals?
Are humans more complex than the animals?
Animal.
Okay. Right. I'll answer it by asking questions. One, complexity can exist at different levels. I think the most distinguishing or striking difference we find in humans compared to animals, like it could be dogs or cats, whatever we see, is our cognitive abilities, the thinking abilities that we have. Okay, so majority of the changes that happen, we'll talk about that in biological factors and in evolution. Our brain has evolved so much to do certain aspects very different from other organisms. We actually, in a way, I don't know if you say, we regulate, we control the whole nature, or we are ruining them. It is because of the brain. So it evolved to perform certain tasks very different from them. We are more intelligent than them. At least we think we are more intelligent than them. So the complexities wise, if you see, that is the case. And even if you see the heart, even if you see the various physiological functions of the body also, you see overall trend of being more complex than the other existing organisms. There may be exceptions to this, some of them more, because they adapted to live like that with more complex systems. But eventually it looks like humans have the most complex systems in part, an average. And the key striking difference is our brain. And we'll see that what parts of the brain are different from primates, for example. And because of those parts, what additional ability we got compared to chimpanzees, compared to gorillas. Okay, we'll study more about this in the next version of evolution. We'll talk towards the end. Okay. Right. So medieval theories. So what are medieval theories? These came mostly in the Christian era. So where we started noticing opposite views of evolution ideas that Greeks had. Greeks had the ideas which are actually more logical, as we talked about, right? But in the medieval times, what happened? People started thinking it differently. Okay, so what did they think here, and what made them to think like that is something that we need to understand here. So they thought, I think, this Christian theory of special creation, or simply theory of special creation. The concept of theory of special creation came here. Creation or theory of special creation. Okay, the statement that you have to make a note here is all living things, according to this theory of special creation, all living things came into existence in unchanging form due to the divine will or due to the God. So God has created all these forms as they are. They're not changing, they are fixed. But God created them. So what do you see as a difference from the previous one? What idea is actually mostly influenced this concept? Why these people thought they are fixed, they're not changing, and they're created by God?
Due to rise of Christianity, so like
Mostly religious beliefs, right? Yes, but here in this specific case, Christianity. That is true with any religion, like Hinduism, doesn't matter, Islam. They have slight various ideas, but religious concept of religion had changed this idea.
but the Greeks also believed in God.
Exactly.
Like,
So Greeks also had the concept of gods, but those people were, they're considered to be outliers in a way, because their ideas were a little bit more revolutionary. Right? So we picked only few. There probably were people who thought something similar to that, but any resources I normally see, they discuss about the concept has been a little bit less logical and more influenced by religious beliefs. Okay, the ones highlighted may look like they didn't have the concept of like that. But yes, you are absolutely right. This concept was already there. Greek gods were very famous at that time. Their belief system was very famous, which later influenced the religious aspects that we see today. Okay, but there were few people who are thinking logically. And Aristotle, given that their contribution to these sciences and anthropology, they were mostly cited in this. Okay, so definitely I think for some period before Darwin, we started seeing that they were not ready to accept that they are changing against the concept of evolution, because for us today, evolution means change. But they said, no, they are not changing. They are created as it is by God. Okay. And interestingly, they even went further to tell when God created them. They even started saying, like, for example, if you notice here, so James Ussher, or Ussher, however you say it, James Ussher was 17th century Archbishop, Anglican Archbishop from Northern Ireland. He even fixed the date. He said creation happened on October 23rd, 4004 BC. He said there was a fine day God decided to create life and created them as they are today. Decided to create all sorts of organisms as they are. It actually shows that because being gone through the ideas of science, how experiments have to be designed, we have a human tendency to bias things, to add bias to every aspect that we see. Doesn't matter, anything that we see. But whenever there's a strong influence of an idea, science doesn't happen. Then you are driven towards one particular direction. And science should have no direction to it. Science should be something where you are honestly asking question, finding an answer to it without adding any bias or any influence from anything. But what happens, we see that even to realize that idea takes time. And clearly these people had that influence. They said, we have to believe in the God and this is how it has to be. And then they decided, okay, on fine day, October 23rd, 4004 BC, God created this. And even they went further. Dr. Charles Lightfoot of Cambridge University, England, he said it was created at 9 a.m. in the morning on that day. 9 a.m. on October 23rd, 4004, life got created by God.
Like 9 a.m. GST, sir. They didn't mention.
Most likely. Right? So, because they were influenced by those ideas. So we cannot even blame them today, although it sounds a little crazy to us today. But at that time, this was a strong belief. Okay, right. So, few more ideas I'm going to add here. So they strongly held the views there that in public mind throughout 17th and 18th century, they actually influenced people and their ideas, their thinking, saying that this is how it is, this is how it had happened, and this is how it has been written. They started writing this in the books as well. Okay, but later, the one who kind of revolutionized the idea, even today we held him as the most influential person related to our understanding of evolution is Carl Linnaeus or Carolus Linnaeus. Okay, he was the person who probably created most of the foundation and the ideas that we still believe today. You probably have heard about Carl Linnaeus or Carolus Linnaeus. He's a Swedish biologist, Swedish botanist, Swedish biologist, Carl Linnaeus, from 18th century, 1707 to 1778. So what he had done great amount of work, very laborious work, collecting samples, plant material, and he could clearly see the difference. He said plants, animals, organisms do exist. And he became the biggest classifier in a way, if I have to say, or a taxonomy. He opened the doors to the concept of taxonomy or classification we see today. And he wrote a book called The Systema Naturae, or The Systema Nature, which was published in 1735, where he talked about various hierarchy of this presence of various species. Okay, and he is also the one who use the term binary nomenclature that we see, or binomial nomenclature we see, meaning two terms for each, like Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, genera and species we use. Okay, and anything like rats, mus musculus. Okay, so these names, the two term names, are binary nomenclature was given by him, introduced by him. Okay, so he's considered to be father of taxonomy. Carl Linnaeus, okay, Swedish scientist. So he organized all these organisms into different orders. So, and he was the one, as I said, who derived the concept of Homo sapiens, because he could see humans are different from plants, from animals, from other species. But you know what? What he said? But one thing that he could not realize, because he still had this influence, he said, yes, there exists the order of differences in them, but they're all happening because of the God will. He said this happened because of the will of God. So he agreed on this. He agreed there is a difference. It was more logical, but he said all this is still because of the God. So still strong influence. Even today, I think we carry the same thing. It is very difficult for us to not think about God in this whole age. Right? And we don't know what is true. I don't think we can judge what is true or what is not true today. But definitely we can see that the belief system is carried on. Okay. So he wrote the books and he still put a foundation to many of the things that we are seeing today, that they are different from each other. But he said they are, they happened, they are like that because of God. They had an image to show his concept here. So brief summary, like these are all collected online. But he said, father of taxonomy. He defined the fundamentals of biology in terms of nomenclature, classification, I was telling you. He grouped them. He grouped the organisms into hierarchy or into different orders with increasingly general categories. Okay, but he said, all this is done for the great glory of God. He is a God's registrar. So what he had done is to just explain the creation of God.
Sir, if they ask us about the evolution, so do we need to write about each of the?
No, you don't. So in case if they specify to write about pre-Darwinian theories, you talk about them. Otherwise, the major theories that we have to talk about is a foundation given by the Carolus Linnaeus mentioning it, and the Lamarckism, Darwinism. But most likely they are specifying what they want, like Lamarckism or Darwinism. If they ask about to summarize pre-Darwinian theories, some of the selected theories that you're going to talk about, Greek, medieval period, and then in the medieval theories, and then the time from the Charles Darwin. So those theories you have to talk about before Darwin, if they specify pre-Darwinian theories. Otherwise, you will not have space, you will not have time. This is the idea. We are developing the idea of evolution. But our emphasis will be mostly on the partly Lamarckism, but mostly on the Darwinism and neo-Darwinism. What happened after Darwin? Okay. Okay, right. Couple of theories before we actually start with Lamarckism concept here. One, in late 18th century, French scientist called Comte de Buffon, Buffon theory it is called. He is the same time of Carl Linnaeus, suggested that life forms are not fixed. He said life forms are not standard, not fixed as many people were suggesting. He believed that there is an influence of environment on living organisms. So slowly we were coming towards the Darwinian ideas here. So as for him, he is a contemporary of Carl Linnaeus. Life forms are not fixed. There is an influence from environment on living organisms, so they are changing. But how, he could not explain, but he said this is happening. And he also done extensive work on them. He wrote 44 volumes of this historic natural book, and he developed more clear ideas than what Linnaeus had. But Linnaeus provided that structure that we are seeing today. So he gets the credit for this, but Buffon also worked on this. And he recognized that there are differences and environment has a role to play in this. Okay, that should be sufficient. So this idea here. And just for you to know, just for the curiosity, and Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, also was an evolutionist. He also talked about this concept. Grandfather of Charles Darwin, from 1731 to 1802, he he said that evolutionary aspects of animals, clearly he recognized that Earth as well as the life on the Earth must have been evolving for a long period of time. So continuing with what Buffon said, yes, there exists the ideas of variations. Okay, eventually they said this is happening for a long time now, maybe for millions of years. He recognized that this process is an ongoing process. Had probably had begun as old as the Earth, as old as the humans, or as old as the living systems were there. For millions of years, this evolution was continuing, was happening. And humans probably are the latest. Humans probably are the latest. Okay. So next one, I think this is the most important one that we have to study after Darwin, is Lamarckism. So we move on towards now Lamarckism. Lamarckism are theory given by French naturalist Lamarck, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, simply Lamarck. So the Lamarck as well had a put strong idea related to evolution, but there were some flaws in his ideas. Okay, so what is Lamarckism? So this is something that can appear in the exam, that can be asked in the exam, Lamarckism. So we have to have the idea about what to write, and there's a lot of specific information that is given with respect to Lamarckism. Okay, I'm switching to the one I posted in the group related to it. So this version specifically discusses the concept of Lamarckism. This is Unit 2, Theories of Evolution, Organic Evolution. I'm going to post, I posted this already in the group, in the course page. So here, they talk slightly differently about the concept, but stick to what I've so far talked about. Special creation, theory of catastrophism, organic evolution. So Lamarckism. So this is first comprehensive theory of evolution. So he gave rise to the first comprehensive theory of evolution. And it is known as inheritance of acquired characters. The theory is known as the theory of inheritance of acquired characters. I'll explain you what does that mean. Theory of inheritance of acquired characters, which was put forth by Lamarck. Hence it is called Lamarckism. So with his background in animal related studies, Lamarck had a background in animal related studies. So he worked on animal classification. In the process, he realized that various species can be fit into an orderly relationship. So he could see the connections. There is change in complexity gradually from one to the another. He said, based on the complexity, we can put them. Okay, it was basically like kind of what Carl Linnaeus had done. So related to that concept, he worked on animal concepts here and could clearly see the gradual change in them and the connection between them. So various species could be placed into an orderly relationship, forming a continuous progression, resulting in this continuous progression. Okay, so clearly he could see something really simple to something most complex. Like humans, he also recognized that humans are the most complex, starting from anything that is simple like cells, beginning with the cells, few groups of cells to humans. There is definitely the complex relationship which is continuously has changed. This is what he recognized. So he recognized what others were telling, and clearly he could see that from the way he classified it. But the thing is, he wanted to explain it. He put forward his theory of why they changed and where did the change happen. So that is where he went a bit wrong here. Okay, so he definitely believed that animals could be modified in order to adapt to the environment, and species were not constant or not fixed, but they're derived from the pre-existing species. So this has been becoming clear now, is that yes, they're not fixed as many people suggested. They are changing, and they are changing to adapt to the environment. Okay, the key idea that Charles Darwin said was, of course, strongly put forward by Lamarck as well. But he could not explain it in the right manner. That is where he went wrong. So how did he explain this? Next, we need to learn how did he explain this, his theory. Okay, he agreed that things were changing, but why and where the changes were happening? Let's see what he explained about it. So his theory consists of, sometimes we only talk about 2 principles, okay? It's up to you. But in the IGNO, they talked about 4 principles. Ideas are same. We just have to know how to put together the idea here. So as per this IGNO source, I'll tell you what are the 2 most important ones. 4 principles, first we learn about it. So there are 4 principles. 1, internal urge of the organism. So how they are going to change, how they adapt. He thought they adapt because they think they want to adapt. Okay, there is an urge in them. There is an internal urge in the organism. Okay, I'll explain it here. So 4 principles here. First principle is internal urge. They want to change, and the want can make the difference. This is what he thought. The internal forces of life tend to increase the size of an organism. So internally, if you want to grow, you grow. So he thought there is an inherent instinct in us, or there are some internal forces acting to increase the size of an organism. So it is not only as a whole organism growing, but even part-wise. Every part as well can grow up to their limit of their function. It can grow if the organism decides to go gradually, maybe not in that generation, but gradually those organisms will grow. So famous example here. What is the famous example that given by him? Giraffes, long-necked giraffes. He thought they had urge to grow. There was a need to grow, and they grew. Eventually, they kept stretching their necks, And eventually they give rise to, from other organisms, something that looks like more like horses to what we see as giraffes today. So there was internal urge. This was the first idea. Internal urge to change, to grow. Next, direct environment and new design. So what happened, this desire that we talked about, internal urge we talked about. Okay, so this will act on a particular organ in the body. If giraffe wants to, collect the food that is not available to them, so it tried to actually reach the, the trees, the top portions of the trees. So there was an need, there was urge, and it was stretching its neck. So it was acting on a particular portion of that body. Okay, so each organ or part is outcome of a new movement. So it started stretching. That was a new movement here in this case, which in turn initiated by a new and continuous desire. Why? Because it wants to eat. So there was a desire inside. It started stretching its neck. So a new movement is created. So because of that, a new organ or a new part became necessary. So a new part got formed because it started stretching. Long neck got formed in it. So now it is not a new part, it already had it, but it had a new feature. That is a long neck is a feature.
Sir,
Yes.
can you explain the second point again, sir? Where is the role of the environment here?
What is the role of environment here? So in this case, it is the availability of food. Environment had, eliminated most of the food that was easily available to the animals here. So what happened? Now they are left with just reaching the food that was on the top of the trees. So that is the need was created by environment here. So they were adapting to their needs. How? By making changes, by actually, there is urge that it has to eat. Environment had created a need for it. It stretched its neck. So it was acting on or emphasizing on particular portion of their body. The particular portion of the body started changing. And over generations, it changed to the level where it had long neck giraffe. It had the neck is really, really long. So it is responding to the environmental needs as you see it.
And the first internal urge was not dependent on anything. It was just the organism which wanted to.
It's difficult to actually separate whether this internal urge is there as per the way it was phrased. It feels like that, but it had to begin there. But mostly what we talk about is these two: use and disuse, inheritance and acquired characteristics is what they normally talk about. The two most important ones, but they all are together. I think for the sake of understanding, they divided them. But internal urge probably had created for the need based on the need. Okay, right. This is what happened in direct environment and new design. To satisfy that, so new organ probably had formed eventually, but not in the same generation, but few changes have happened, accumulated, and accumulated changes went on to next generation. So use and disuse. We'll talk more about this direct environment part in continuation with the inheritance of acquired characteristics. But he also talked about use and disuse. There are two ways this can go. There are two ways this change can go. Either you emphasize it or you, kind of, reduce the need for it. So both in a positive sense and negative sense it can go. Use and disuse theory. The development of an organ is in direct proportion to its use. Meaning if you use it more, it will get strengthened. So continued use strengthen the organ little by little until it is fully developed and attained. So it is like you have so much of capacity, ability, but they don't grow as far as you put emphasis. It's like, you work out. You do more workout, your body will grow into that structure that you may need, your body capacity it has. But people don't do workout, it will stay as it is. You need to emphasize something on it. This is the type of examples he took as well. If you keep using that, that part will get strengthened. Continuous use will
It
strengthen.
should be like for generations, right? Like
Yeah.
someone doing exercise will build the muscle, but whether it will pass to the generation or not, that should be the question, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. That is what he could not explain. He thought this is how he explained it, but people ask the same question. If those changes, are they inherited to the next generations? He could not explain that. That is where he failed. But yes, absolutely right. In the same direction, we have to think about this. But for now, I'm just introducing the concept here that he thought strengthening the organs happens by continuous usage of them. And opposite is true. If you don't use it, if you stop using the ideas here, disuse the meaning not using the organs, they will eventually diminish or disappear. Because he had to explain this, why some of them have wings, why don't others have the same wings. He said, okay, they were not using them, they were not used for them, so they disappeared. And where they strengthened more, few organs are kept using more organs, they become more strong. So he thought new organs have formed like that, old organs have disappeared. Okay, there are examples I'm going to give here on this. That is the reason why I like this source as well. Nice examples that they've given. We just talked about a long neck giraffe, okay, a deer-like organism or animal becoming a giraffe. When there was a shortage of supply of grass and herbs. Okay, so giraffes were forced as part of this. There was an urge, there was a need. They put more strength on them, and it strengthened further. There are a couple of more examples that he used to explain this. We'll come to that. Let me finish talking about the next one. And I'm also going to show you a chart. There is an easier way of explaining this, especially the last parts, use and disuse and inheritance of acquired characteristics. I found this online. I think nice way of presenting this information. I'll show you that. So just listen to me, then I'll show you the image and you can write in that order. So inheritance of acquired characteristics. So what he thought, all the acquired characteristics by stretching them, by either using them or disusing them. So these characteristics are preserved. Somehow they made changes to whatever is inside that is controlling. At that time, they didn't know that there was DNA. So they thought by making these changes, maybe building muscles, for example, made changes to the body, they thought. Okay. And they got preserved in their life and transmitted to the new individuals who proceed this action and this change. So he's not saying that giraffe had become giraffe in one generation. He's saying that giraffe started stretching it, and the whatever stretch or attempt it has done, it was stored in its body. This message was given to the next generation. Next generation continued to stretch. Eventually, it resulted in long-necked giraffe, he thought. So he thought this is probably the logical way, but he could not satisfy the evidences. I will tell you next where he failed, what aspects can oppose this concept, which is obvious to us. Okay, inheritance of acquired characteristics, all those acquired or altered changes were preserved in them and transmitted to the next generations. And next generations continue to do this to receive that special character or special organ. Okay. Let me show you this image. This one. So said there is an internal urge. Internal urge acted upon by environmental changes. So he thought internal urge was existing inherent. That is how he thought. And then there was a need created for that. Environmental change happened. And then new needs have arisen. So two possibilities. From new needs, one, it started using organs, some organs. So structures got strengthened, they developed better. And this was stored in their characteristics. These characteristics are stored in their body. And these got inherited to the next generation, eventually giving rise to new species or species with new difference in the case example that we talked about from deer to, in a way, giraffe. It can also take other route where organs were not needed because of a change in the needs. They got disused and they became weaker and weaker. They disappeared. And these disappeared characteristics are inherited to the next generation, resulting in new species. Same, I think similar manner, we also have it for Darwinism, but I'm going to explain it.
But here, internal urge plus the environmental changes led to new needs.
Come again?
Here, the internal urge plus the environmental changes together led to new needs.
Yeah, so what happens here, there was an internal urge in them, environment change had happened. Like for example, new need means in the case of giraffe, so they need to reach the plants which are trees where there was otherwise no food was available to them. Okay, the need was created because of the change in environment.
Okay.
So the new need here is to reach the upper side of the trees because most of the ones are thick enough to eat it. Okay, good. So I think this type of representation is very good in case if you have to explain this. Okay. So he cited many examples. We talked about long neck giraffe being formed from a deer-like ancestor of giraffe. Okay. So especially to make it reach the leaves in the higher branches and it stretched the neck. And eventually what happens, and the forelegs were raised as well. So eventually it started seeing that in the coming generations, it resulted in something that looked like this, from something that was like a deer, short-necked ancestor, to something that they had, the long neck like this, and able to reach, satisfy its need. So imagine that the environmental change was like that, and whatever was incorporated into its body or tried to incorporate into its body, it continued. Need continued, and as well as the stretching continued, resulting in this. And stretch causing the change. Because in the absence of a lot of other information, this made sense. So that's how modern species have been created, driven by inner need. Similarly, he also explained similar examples. One, webbed feet of aquatic birds like ducks. You probably have seen ducks have those webbed feet. They have attachment between their fingers, the digits. The webbed feet were initiated by hunger, the need for food, and which drove the birds to swampy areas to seek food. So they have to swim in the swampy areas. So thereby having this type of webbed feet was helpful to them. So the need was here, environmental change was here, is food, looking for the food in the swampy areas. In this environment, the birds would have made efforts to swim by spreading their toes. In this process, toes were spreading out generation after generation. So this got just the way stretching had happened, and it continued to stretch of the skin between the toes, gradually produce the webbed condition. Okay, you can read this, don't have to write this example. but you can read it from the source. Remember the giraffes example. Similarly, he took a couple of other examples. One is the webbed feet of aquatic birds. Okay, in the interest of time, you can write it later because I'm going to share this. I think this document is already shared with you, right? So you have the access to it already. Similarly, he talked about origin of snakes as well. So snakes, I think before generations, they had limbs, but those limbs are lost because you have to explain why they don't have any legs. Okay, so there was loss of limbs stemming from the habit of moving along the ground and concealing themselves among the bushes. So the snakes had a need to hide from the enemies in the bushes. Okay, so they started moving on the ground, and eventually, in the process of getting into the bushes, they didn't use the legs to walk. So disuse of organs. Organs were lost. This is what he thought. This habit led to continued efforts to elongate the body in order to pass through the narrow places. As a result, animal acquired a long, narrow body and got rid of the legs. So since long legs would have been useless, or it was disusing it and using the mostly the move for the movement, it is using the body got stretched and legs are lost. That's how he thought snakes have probably have evolved. Okay, so there are some examples, there are more examples that he gave. Even bird wings, he thought, absence of wings in the non-flying birds. So kiwi of New Zealand is believed to have descended from flying birds. So they probably were originally flying, but eventually gave rise to kiwi-like birds which don't fly. When these birds reached New Zealand, they were able to fly. On settling down, the availability of plenty of food, there was no need to fly for them. So disuse of organs eventually led to the loss of their wings. This is what he thought. That is how some birds which don't normally fly probably have originated from birds that could fly. Okay, so is logic clear? This is how he thought. This is how he explained it. You don't have to write all these examples. Giraffe is the most famous example. If at all, you have to write it for 10 marker or 15 marker question. So add a couple of more examples. But you also have to talk about, is it really true? Where did he went wrong? Where did he go wrong here? Where did he go wrong? So mostly because of unnatural explanations. The explanations that we are seeing here is unnatural. We thought by stretching they will have long neck. Or people, we also have an example, blacksmiths. They had stronger biceps because they kept using the right hand. They had more biceps on the right hand than on the left hand. That's why I thought blacksmiths actually, because of the usage of right arms, have more developed biceps on the right arm. But they never had children who actually also have arms like them. So it is never transmitted to next generation in the form of somatic characteristics that we're talking about. These are all somatic cells. Neck, if you talk about, feet, you talk about, arms, biceps, you talk about. They're all somatic cells. And today we know that during the cell division process, characteristics go from germ cells to the gametes to next generation, not from the somatic cells. Somatic cells don't make changes to their DNA and don't transfer their DNA. They do have mutations, but they don't get transferred to the next generations. So these explanations were unnatural. Okay, and of course it makes sense because most of his concepts were put forward in the 19th century time, where there was no concept of cell structure or organisms and the mechanisms for sexual reproduction, fertilization. None of these things were known. In the absence of that, he thought this is a logical explanation. Okay, although there were flaws in his ideas, but still gradual change in organisms from less complex to more complex and a change in environment, these things could be, they're acceptable. And they become kind of foundation for the next theories, next set of theories made by other people. Okay, so you can add this as part of criticism. There is also, I think, one scientist who worked on the concept to disprove it. He disproved that he's wrong. He's wrong. Okay, I'll also give that example. But these ideas I was talking to you, you can use them as criticism for Lamarck. There is a severe criticism Lamarck faced, and he had to defend it till his death. So what are those objections? I think we already talked about some of these objections. First principle, on the tendency to increase in size, is true in case of many organisms. However, this is not universally accepted, and there is instances to show reduction in size of the organ also. So organ doesn't have to always increase. There were times organs where they decreased as well. So this concept of increasing size that he was talking about is not necessarily true. Second,
so a reduction in height can be the example of, with age, can be the example for first case.
reduction in age is microevolution, right?
Reduction in height with age.
Yes, that's micro, meaning that only happens in the duration of a person's life. If that is true, people who got shortened, their children should be short to begin with. So you cannot take it as an example because you are talking about something that happens in one's lifetime. So in evolution, we have to talk about something that happens over periods of time, over generations. Okay, like for example, probably some birds had smaller wings than the others. So they don't have to increase in size. They can become more efficient by decreasing in size as well. Right? So some parts like that, legs, arms. So any of those things, they don't have to necessarily grow in size. There can be even decrease in size. Still they satisfy, still they are part of adaptation. Okay, second one, new organs develop upon new desire. It's like, saying that humans want to fly. Do we develop wings? So desire cannot give rise to characteristics or organs. So he went wrong in this idea as well. New organs develop on new desires. If every human being who desires to fly in the air should develop wings, but such is not the case. There's a little bit of exaggeration, but explains it well.
But he can say that we are flying today, so.
But for a different reason, right? Not because you have or you grew, wings. That is a different story. That is because of brain grew. So another one is use and disuse theory. If use and disuse theory is correct, yes, I think logically to a certain extent, if you keep using it, strengthening them or having those biceps makes sense. But it cannot generalize it. Why? Because as you see in this example, if this theory is correct, then the size of the eyes should grow with age. Because we read more, we get exposed to reading more books, more activity related to the eyes. But we know that they don't grow, they don't stretch. They get actually more strained these days. I think before this course, I didn't have glasses. This last few days, I've been wearing glasses because we strain them. We actually lose the strength of overuse, or maybe we insult them. Okay. So the fourth principle that we talked about, inheritance of acquired characters. So this is probably the most important one. The rest of the things we can, to a certain extent, can satisfy, not generalizing them. But inheritance of acquired characteristics is not correct because somatic cells don't carry them, germ cells carry them, which was not known. So he went with this idea. And interestingly, this scientist, the another person, August Weismann, a German biologist, did an interesting experiment to prove this. You know what he had done? Let me briefly explain. This is a brief story. So what he did, he actually took white mice. He took white mice and cut the tails. Cut the tail and let it give rise to the next generation. So like that for 20 generations, he kept cutting their tails. Even after that, the 21st generation, there was a normal tail. He said, although I could cut the tail, this characteristic actually not influenced anything in its whatever inside. So the character still kept going. And cutting the tails did not result in the mice with shorter tail. So he said, if Lamarchism is correct, then this should be the case. So he disproved it through experiment. Okay, and he could also explain that there is something called protoplasm, so somatoplasm, germplasm. He said, in the body, there's something that doesn't get inherited, and the body is something that gets inherited. Somatoplasm, germplasm concept had begun here. Somatic cells, sex cells we're talking about today is connected to that. So germplasm, changes in germplasms are important and they only get transmitted. Okay, and anything that happens during the lifetime an organism is not transmitted. Unless these changes happen inside the germ cells, inside the DNA of the germ cells, only then they get transmitted. Those ideas started to appear. Okay, several examples for this. I think most commonly they use Chinese women wearing iron shoes. Okay, they want to have their feet short for many generations. But even then, the children who are born to them have normal feet. How much ever they cover with the iron shoes, they wanted to have those, which were like a tinier feet. It didn't happen. They kept having those. This is also true with circumcision. Circumcision after generation doesn't change the prepuce. Okay, but these are the examples. So you can talk about Weizmann's experiment to disprove this theory. You can talk about Chinese wearing that, and even India piercing the ears. You pierce the ears, but generation after generation you have to still pierce them because children are not born with these type of holes in their ears because this is somatic characteristics. They don't get acquired. They don't get inherited. Okay. So this is the concept of Lamarckism.
So maybe he might have studied the diseases inheritance.
Come again? Maybe he might have studied the
Inheritance of disease and given these theories.
yes. But also at that time, the belief about diseases were also very different. They didn't agree that something from outside is causing the problem. Are there microorganisms? These type of things that they were not aware about. They knew that something was happening, like biting by snakes. Some of these things they knew, but they didn't know the mechanism how this was happening. So there was absence of proper understanding of diseases as well at that time. They know that if something like this happened, you feed them something like a plant material extract, it gets better. So they were experimenting on it, but they didn't have a clear picture about diseases and their evolution at that time. We'll talk about this in epidemiological anthropology, a dedicated unit for this, about how diseases evolved, and what is the concept of disease in terms of anthropology. Okay, right. So this is what Lamarckism is about. Very important, although it was actually flawed in many ways, but still provided the idea that evolution is gradually happening, and environment is influencing that change. This is what he figured. Okay, right. So, but these are 4 steps clear to you. Even you can manage to write if you are writing a shorter note. Don't have to just mention the like in the image before. Urge talk about the new needs and environmental role, but emphasize mostly on these parts, the last parts. Okay, use and disuse of organ and inheritance of acquired characteristics. It's up to you, depending on the need, demand of the question. Either you talk about 4 of them like this, or just mention internal urge and environmental change, creating the new need, but focus mostly on the use and disuse and inheritance of acquired characteristics. Okay. Later, some scientists have actually worked on his theories and improved them further. Okay. I don't know whether this is really necessary, but just want you to be familiar about this idea that neo-Lamarckism also happens. A few other evolutionary biologists like Herbert Spencer himself, Cope Law, we are going to study. A few of these names you will come across. Spencer and Cope. I don't think we'll study about many people here. So they studied the modified Lamarckism and modified it further. So they gave rise to modified version of Lamarckism, which is also called neo-Lamarckism. Okay, I don't think this is necessary because in the exam point of view as well, but I'll give you a brief idea, a brief concept related to that. So they were trying to prove that some of his aspects were right and making changes to some of these ideas. So for example, they did an experiment like this, Griffiths experiment you see here. So where he took the rats and placed them on the rotating table for several months. They kept rotating them for months. So they developed dizziness in them. Okay. So, and they also starting to adapt to the extent that even after rotation stopped, they continue to have dizziness. And they said that the offspring of these rats also exhibited dizziness, and irregularly, they were also experiencing this problem. So they concluded that acquired character is inherited to the offspring. Okay, these were just the attempts to prove that some of his ideas were correct, but they failed in many ways, it's clear. So it doesn't add too much of significance to what we're talking about here. So, but yes, there were attempts. Just be familiar that there were attempts to explain that maybe some concepts of Lamarckism was right, and they were modifying it a bit. Okay, right. So this is about the concept of Lamarckism. The next one, the most important one, is Darwinism. Darwinism. So let me briefly explain you about the concept of Darwinism and how Darwinism is different from Lamarckism. Okay, so here, little bit of background to who is Darwin, what he did, and how did he come to this conclusion, which is more or less accepted by many as the probably the greatest theories that have been put forward to explain evolution. But of course, he didn't do it by himself. Most of the ideas and influences came from many other people, but he did the work meticulously to prove it and provide evidences to it. He also failed it in certain ways, but his ideas are still held true and added significantly to current understanding of evolution. That is why Charles Darwin is known as father of evolution, although contribution came from many other people. Because the work he did and integrated all the information and put forward more concrete idea through his own work in the process, of course. Okay, so he's from 19th century, 1802, 1888, born in England, and he had been influenced by many people. Like we're talking about Greek theories, of including Aristotle theory, he was aware about, and also he read the view of his grandfather, and also he read the comprehensive theory of Lamarckism. So he was influenced. He already was informed about these theories and what are the shortcomings of those theories he could figure out. So with his background, and the exposure that he got, probably he was better fit to bring up this idea because he continued this interest in research. And mainly this happened because of his voyage on HMS Beagle. Okay, so what happened here? British government at his time, I think he did his biology, and they wanted someone to actually travel in the ship to manually map the places that they were traveling. So he was given a task. He was on a job. He was an assignment here. So as part of this voyage by famous HMS Beagle, so beginning from 1831 to 1833, also for another round. So totally 5 years he spent on different islands. Okay, most importantly, Galapagos Islands. So South American region, these regions he was traveling at that time. So where he studied and explored the fauna and flora, plants and animals he was exploring in various different islands and continents. And he got an insight. He could compare them. He could see birds. We'll take several examples of birds and how birds were different in different islands and what made them to be different. He could see the connection there, like food being the major cause. Okay, we'll talk about this adaptations by them. We'll talk about the adaptive radiation concept, which further explains it for now. So this process had begun from his past exposure and influenced by many other scientists before him and biologists and anthropologists before him. So later, also because of his travel on the HMS Beagle and his deeper insight he gained by analyzing this plants and animals on those islands. Okay, we'll talk about that in the context of how those things like adaptive radiations have influenced and helped him to come to the conclusion that he came up with on, I think, most accepted theory of evolution in a way. Also, publications at that time, Malthus and Charles Lyell Alfred Russel Wallace. Okay, so these people's books are also Darwin was studying. So they influenced, those ideas were also kind of gave impetus to what he came up with. Okay, so Malthus, for example, his essay on the principles of populations, where he talked about populations increase geometrically and food sources decrease arithmetically. We'll talk about that in unit 11 in the theories, demographic theories. This is one such theory. That's something very well known, Malthusian theory that we call. So he studied about Malthusian theory, connection between how populations vary and how their food resources diminish. And Lyell, so he talked about in principles of geology, explained gradualism, that Earth has slowly and gradually changed over time. So he understood that it is happening for a long period of time and a slow process. Okay, and the ideas, overall ideas of the Earth are fundamental laws related to the Earth and their management or maintenance is even true today. So he said, then what has changed over a period of time? Then Wallace, he wrote about a paper called On the Tendency of Varieties to Depart from Original Types. So change. He talked about the concept of change from the original type to the other new varieties. So all these things he could put together. So I think that probably had helped him greatly. So if you have to write about Darwinism, mention about the influence that he got from various resources like this. Okay, let's look at his theory. What is his theory? How can his theory be explained here? Okay, in his theory also, we can go with multiple points, or I'll first give you the idea from the map, from the image. Okay. So Darwin's voyage, so various islands in New Zealand, Australia, South America, Africa. And he came up with this idea of natural selection. So this is the concept here. So look at this image. I'll explain you this further. First of all, there was overproduction. Population was increasing. There was a competition that is being in place. He understood that concept from Malthusian theory. Overproduction was happening, which resulted in struggle for existence. There was a competition. They were fighting for food. They were fighting for resources. Okay, but only some of them could win. Only some of them could be fit, became better fit. Why? Because there were variations added to them. Some sort of changes that they're adapting. So the changes are happening maybe defined by environment. This is where the concept of natural selection comes into the picture. Diversity is happening. Variations are taking place. This is something that we have not seen before, right? So overproduction was happening. There was a struggle for existence. And then there were variations happening differently in different people, giving them a little bit of an advantage or a disadvantage over the others. If they are favorable variations, if they are providing advantage, then what happened? They become fit. And the concept of survival of the fittest got generated here. But how did they become fit? Is someone selecting them? It sounds so, because he introduced the concept of natural selection. Nature is selecting them. But actually, we'll discuss more about natural selection theories in population genetics. For now, we'll keep it to simple ideas to understand the theories. But when I talk about population genetics, mostly after this chapter, I'm going to discuss about population genetics, where there we are going to spend more time, mutations, recombinations, and natural selection. We'll discuss more in detail with specific examples. But for now, just go with this idea that natural selection, where environment has a role to play to define whether this organism is going to survive or not. But it is not planned event. It is not selecting anything, although the name sounds like that. What is happening? Because of the advantageous characteristics or variations that are present in these organisms, okay, they provided them the fitness, additional fitness compared to the other organisms. Thereby, we call the concept as survival of the fittest. Whoever are the fit, whoever acquired those variations, they survived. So this is called survival of the fittest. So variations is a source for change. Okay, our variations is the effect. Sources, we could not figure out what was the source for the variation. Later, Gregor Mendel and also Dobzhansky, these type of people have given this insight. So at this time, he didn't know where variation came from. He knows that variation came from, don't know from where. So favorable variations. Some of them are advantageous. When they within the advantages, those changes or characteristics made them fit to survive. And these got inherited. These favorable variations got inherited. Those mutations, those changes that we know today got inherited because these changes happened in their germline. And a gradual accumulation of favorable variations, generations after generations, some mutations were there. They adapted better. And these people who adapted better, they survived better. And they continue to acquire changes. Random. Not same person acquires changes. We're talking about population level here. So changes get accumulated in them generations after generations on many people. Some may not go directly towards the better adapted state or better or fittest state. But others could. It's like probability theory. People could acquire changes, some of them advantages, some of them disadvantages. But those people who kept acquiring changes, they kept becoming fit and fit generation after generation. Eventually, they become someone who were very different from where they started. Like primates, monkeys or chimpanzees. They got changed over a period of time. Eventually, they changed so many times by acquiring those changes. Eventually, the new product became looked very different from the existing species, of the old species. So species, generation of species or origin of species, the concept had begun here. Origin of new species had come. We'll discuss the theories here, but this is the idea. So I repeat this. Overproduction resulted in some sort of competition or struggle for existence, and people had some variations in them. Some of them were favorable. When they were favorable, what happened? They survived better. Okay, and inheritance of these favorable variations happened. These variations went to generation because they didn't happen just within them, within the somatic, through the somatic changes. They happened over a period of time in their germline. So this, whatever was part of germline got distributed. He could not explain the concept of germline, but he knew that people were the fit. People could survive because of those features. And they got inherited over a period of time. And gradually they got accumulated, finally to give rise to new species. And opposite to that, if variations were not favorable, what happened? These organisms could not survive. Only fittest ones could survive. These organisms got eliminated. They disappeared. Those with the undesirable changes or unuseful changes. This is where he said natural selection may be acting. So it was not selecting, but because of this combination of need in that environment, need for their adaptation, and those who adapted survived, rest of them who did not adapt died. They went away. So those organisms disappeared. Only new species which could adapt to these changes survived. Like that, new species have generated. Evolution kept creating new species.
Sure. So, whatever mutation we have, that results in variation.
Mutation is a source for variation. So mutation is one such source and the most important source for variation. Okay, but there are other sources as well, like recombination, and we'll talk about few other migration. So those things we'll talk about in population genetics. Okay, we'll put more emphasis on this later in other class, but for now, just understand that here there is variation, which he could not explain, but mutation is definitely the main source of variation that introduce a change. But these variations get accumulated to result in the new features and features that help them to survive. This is what happened with all the organisms. Those which could fly, the ability had helped them to survive. They could migrate, they could travel, they could find food. Humans, for us, the features of the brains, better adaptability and better complexity in the brain, where we could teach people how to survive. So it doesn't matter. Now we are able to survive irrespective of what weather. Where we could survive in the polar regions, we are surviving in the equator regions. Because now we found out how to survive through our intelligence. Otherwise, we would have been extincted long ago, like some of our ancestral species did. Okay, now probably we are redefining the concept of evolution today. We are maybe interfering the whole concept of evolution today by introducing technology. So kind of we are disturbing the evolutionary process. Otherwise, we should have just stayed like that in the forest, lived like that for the life to happen. But we have changed it. We have to wait and see how it happens. What changes will happen to evolution. It doesn't matter. I think evolution, that is why I'm trying to tell you, It has no direction. Evolution has no direction. It is not aiming to become or give rise to the best human being. No. Maybe there's something better can come more than humans, which we cannot think. So maybe evolve into someone else in future. So they will study that so-and-so species have come from humans. Humans existed at one point of time. But there is, yeah.
And so maybe it need not to go through us also. Like as the humans only will evolve to something else. Some other species might evolve to something else. And
every this is happening for every species into every different things. The one route that it took is us. There may be other routes it is taking, but I'm talking in the context of humans, what we think today. We may disappear in future. We may not be perfect. So I don't think it is going towards making something perfect. So here what happens, I think we'll learn this in polymorphism and population genetics. So this happens to be there. It's a gradual and natural process. We are in a situation where temperature is changing. Those who have dark skin may survive. Those who have lighter skin will not survive and die. Okay, those people who are sensitive to certain type of foods cannot survive. The others can because they have mutations like HIV, good example these days. People who have CCR5 mutation in particular gene, which allows the entry of HIV into it, those people can survive if HIV becomes more common. So people who have those mutations may be able to survive, those who don't may die. But we have technology intervention being brought. We are able to treat the people with HIV. We cannot cure it, but we can definitely treat and delay the process. So now new dimensions probably will take place because of this interference. But doesn't matter. It doesn't have to have a natural phenomena. It doesn't matter. Antibiotics, your drugs, medicines, whatever you're taking, within that context, evolution will still happen. Okay, it won't feel bad that no natural things have disappeared. I'm not going to move and I'm going to change anything. It doesn't happen like that. Natural selection will continue to act. Okay, or this process will happen where those who are fit will survive and the others may not survive because they won't be able to adjust. They die. Not all species of humans have survived, right? Homo sapiens have been surviving for now, several lakhs of years, but others didn't, for thousands of years at least. Others didn't. Okay, so this is a brief concept of Darwinism. Okay, give it a read from this document I've given you. Give it a read. Okay, but if you are able to explain these terms I've given, that is more than enough. You don't need much more than that. With that image, if you are able to explain each of those steps, so the description is given here, the 5 principles, overproduction is discussed here, and the concept of validation of hereditary. So how these concepts link to hereditary components, struggle for existence, okay, and then survival of the fittest, and how changes have acquired over a period of time, finally resulting in origin of species. Give it a read. If you're stuck anywhere, we'll discuss in the next class. And then we'll talk about the issues with Darwinism as well. What happened with, what are wrong with Darwinism? And then we'll move on to the neo-Darwinism. How new theories are put together and modified or strengthened the concepts given by Darwin to give rise to what we believe today. Okay, but still a floating idea. It is still changing. The concept will change. But we'll talk about what is neo-Darwinism, what happened after Darwin, how different concepts have given rise to our picture of evolution today. Okay, we'll discuss this in the next class. So next class, the idea is to finish talking about issues in Darwinism and post-Darwinian theories we are going to talk about. So which also is called a synthetic theory of evolution. Once we discuss about that, there are few terms, like there are few rules like Dollo's rule, Cope's rule, Gauss rule, and few terms like speciation, parallelism. We're going to talk about them. Okay, maybe in 1.5 class, we should be able to wind this up and then start with the population genetics, where we'll get more insight. We'll talk about all the sources of variation. We'll talk about how natural selection acts. I'll give you more insight in that chapter. Good. Any questions on this? Any other questions that you have? So sources are given to you. I'm going to post this source as well. The one that I was showing you for pre-Darwinian theories, I'm going to post that. I will look at that for the first part. Second part, whatever I already posted, take the Lamarchism from there and Darwinism. And also neo-Darwinism. So further, there is also concept of neo-Darwinism here. So we'll discuss that in the next class. Right? So this is a very good source. If you are interested to read more, there are many sources where there are collection of information is there. I don't think that is necessary. Even if you read from Ember and Ember also had a this concept given in the, okay? But I don't think it adds anything new as far as I see for evolutionary part. Okay, so you can stick to this, but if at all you felt that you need something more for reading, do let me know. I can give you that source. But I felt this is far better than those sources and easy for us to digest. Any questions before we end the session? Okay, I'm going to post those questions so that you can submit them. Or else, as I said, as we are figuring out what is the best way to do it, how do you submit them in Sir's classes? Question and answer.
Telegram.
In the Telegram.
For test, we submitted for Telegram, and then
okay.
I think as recently he suggested that we should write and submit. Earlier, he was using a separate software tool, Padlet.
Achha, Padlet, yes. I also have access to Padlet. But when we do discussions, we'll go with Padlet. Do you want me to put the questions in the Padlet? Do you want to try on the Padlet? Or you prefer writing it and give it to me on the Telegram?
Writing and giving. And one more thing, Sir also gave a link to upload. So it was dependent on whoever wants to give it on Telegram, give it there. Or he gave another choice to upload it from the site itself. But that was timed.
That was Padlet. The site you're talking about Padlet or?
No, not Padlet. The portal itself, the Feynman IAS portal.
I think there, if I put a question as an assignment, there you will have an option to upload the file.
Yeah, that way.
I'll do that. I'll put it on that, but whatever you're comfortable, it doesn't matter to me. Either I upload it and I have to download it, or Telegram is also easy for me. I use Telegram very much. So either of it.
Telegram is much easier.
Telegram is easier? You
Yes,
go ahead with Telegram. So I already gave you questions, submit them on the Telegram. Those students who are not attending the class, maybe I'll put this assignment on either Telegram or there. Okay? Okay, that's it for today then. So we'll meet again on Friday at the same time. We'll continue with this other theories. So this is compared to the other classes, genetics classes, DNA. These are more easier, right? Easier to follow, right? So those require a little bit of, they're challenging. But if you figured out, you will realize that later the DNA concepts, the genetics principles that we learned will help you in understanding human genetics part better. You will appreciate that later. But evolution is an easier concept. So yes, read it. And if you have any difficulty or any issues, do let me know. Okay, right, guys. So thank you. We'll meet in the next class then.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.